Are you a landlord and you decided to evict your tenant prior to the expiry date of your tenancy contract? In this episode, Michael and we answer these questions and we go through the procedures about what to do and what to avoid in order to land on the right side of the law. Hi everyone and welcome to Dubai Property Legal Guide, a series of videos I made answering the most common questions I receive from my investors, landlords, tenants, and real estate brokers. Joining me today is Michael, who is from my social media team. He gathered all the questions that we will be answering one of them in this episode. So, over to you, Michael.
Thanks so much, Arash. Right, so today's topic that we're talking about is eviction prior to the expiry of the lease term. So that involves the tenant leaving the property, being asked to leave the property before the end of the contract. Now, this is useful for both the landlord, they need to know what's going on, they need to know how to do that, and also for the tenant in case they are being asked to do so. So that's probably a good place to start. Is that even possible? Can a landlord ask a tenant to leave before?
Yes, it is possible.
And how common is that?
It's happening a lot, actually. It's pretty much common, and you see it from both sides that tenants they are coming and asking us that would this be a cause or a reason for a landlord to evict us, and we get the same question from landlord that can I evict my tenant for this reason.
And who's a typical winner or loser in that case?
Well, whoever has the proof, if the landlord has the proof to confirm and uphold their claim, obviously the landlord will be the winner, and the tenant unfortunately has to evict the property and find another.
And what are some of the consequences involved if that goes through?
Obviously, in most cases, the tenant will be facing the consequences, and they have to go leave the apartment and find another property to live in. But in some situation, tenant will be actually happy. We will have an example to cancel the contract and leave the property.
All right. Now, so for anyone that's in this situation, I'm just going to go through the actual law in question. I'm going to pull this up on the screen and just read it for you. The landlord can evict a tenant prior to the expiry of the lease term by serving notice to the tenant. The notice must be served either through a notary public or by registered mail. Now, the location of this actual law, it's Article 25(1) of the amendment, Law number 26 of 2007, regulating the relationship between landlords and tenants in the Emirate of Dubai as amended by Law number 33 of 2008. Now, in this law, I'm just going to ask for a bit of clarity before we move forward. So can you just explain to me, what is a notary public?
Notary public is the authority that is allowed and permitted to notarize documents such as legal notices. The reason that we do this is to make sure that the legal notice is already registered and duly notarized before we send it. This gives us the right to use this document as a valid proof when we file a case against the tenant.
Okay, well then, thank you for clearing that up. With all of this in mind and understanding the law, knowing what it is, what are some of the most common reasons and most common grounds that might come up for someone to be evicted prior to the expiry of the lease?
Yeah, one of the most common reason is that the tenant doesn't pay the rent. So they are paying in installment. If they stop any of these payments, the landlord will have the right to evict, provided that they serve a legal notice to the tenant and give them 30 days. If within 30 days the tenant does not pay, then the landlord can go and request the eviction. That's number one. Number two is that if the tenant goes and subleases the property to a third party without written approval of the landlord. In this situation, the tricky part is that we have involved a third party. So if the landlord goes and requests the eviction, both the tenant and the subtenant will be evicted. And don't forget that the subtenant will have the right to file a compensation case against the tenant.
That makes sense. Now, that seems like something that happens in Dubai quite often. Is that something you come up against?
It happens, yes. It happens because people, they are not aware that they are not allowed to sublease and they think that it's their legal right, but law doesn't permit that.
So it's illegal technically to sublease, or it depends on the actual agreement and the contract?
And the landlord has to approve that in writing.
Okay.
Another thing that I can pinpoint here is that if the tenant uses the property for non-permitted use, what it means is that a property is a residential property, and then the tenant uses this as his office or the other way around. They rent an office space, and then the tenant will live in the office as well. In these cases, the tenant will have the landlord will have the right to request an eviction.
All right, so thank you. Those are the most common ones that might come up. If you're watching this, you will see now on the screen I've got the rest of them. There are other grounds that are involved in the process. If you're going through this kind of a situation, please feel free to pause it, take a screenshot if you need this for your reference. So now that we've seen some of the reasons that might come up, we know, of course, that a landlord can indeed evict someone before the expiry of the lease term. We know what some of those reasons might be. What's the actual process for putting that into place? Can the landlord do it themselves? Do they need a lawyer to help them in the process? And sort of what does that process look like? What are the costs and documents and stakeholders?
Yeah. Let's do this step by step. So, answering your first question, I would definitely advise a person who wants to go and file a case before RDC to at least to consult with a lawyer if they don't ask a lawyer to represent them. The reason is that there are several steps that needs to be taken before filing the case. If the procedure are not taken in the right way and in the way that the law requires, then there is a chance that they will lose their case or they will not get what they have in mind. That's why we have clients that before even taking any further steps, they just come and get consultation, and in most cases we represent them before RDC. But there are some landlords that they decide to do it on their own, and some of them they can.
It's certainly safer though to have that assistance.
Definitely, because it's a whole different environment. They're not familiar with the environment. They're not familiar with the procedure, so they have to ask someone who's expert in this field to take their place and represent them.
So along that process, what are some of the costs and documents, and what does the process look like? Who might be involved in the process?
In terms of documents, don't forget that you are claiming something. In order to uphold your claim, you need to provide certain proofs. Without proofs, of course, you cannot have a case. So they need the right documentation to prove that claim. And then there are legal notices, the way that we refer to. There are legal notices that needs to be served with the right text, right information to be indicated. Costs, the normal cost is 3.5% of the annual rent that needs to be paid to the RDC. They need to pay the lawyer the consultation fee or the representation fee, and some other fees, smaller amounts for legal translation of documents if it's required. Other people involved, I can say that in some cases experts are involved. The case is complicated. It requires expertise, someone who can evaluate the situation, except the judge. And then the expert will be appointed either by RDC or as an independent expert. They will come prepare a report and submit it to the judge so that the judge can easily understand and evaluate the whole case.
Yeah, that makes sense then. And then in that process, are there any sort of external influences, or are there any sort of weird anomalies that might change it and make that not the case?
Well, the law is certainly clear. The practice is very common. This is something that we are doing on daily basis. So for us, I think everything is under control. But if a landlord or a tenant, they are representing themselves, they're not having any lawyers on their side, so they might be surprised with some facts that they were not aware of.
Well, I'm sure that now won't be the case because you've now walked us through the whole process, and I certainly feel like I understand it a bit better, and I feel more comfortable as someone renting in Dubai that I'm not going to get kicked out for no reason, at least.
Yeah.
So that's all the points that we had for this topic, which was eviction prior to the expiry of the lease term. And back to you.
Thank you so much, Michael, for doing this. For everyone else, thank you so much for watching. And if you have any questions in this regards, please feel free to send me an email to arash@zodlaw.com. You know my website. You can find me on arashzod.com or through my social media handles, arashzod. So thank you for watching this again, and I'll see you on the next episode.